to farmers about using multi-species mixes in their operations. So I think we'll go ahead and turn things over to Chase. Chase, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we will let you get started.
Are we good there, Tori? Did it come up?
Yep, we're good. We see it.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Certainly a pleasure to be here and appreciate AFT for asking me to be a part of this. This is my first time kind of being on the ICCON groups. So kind of fun and hope to tune into some of them in the future. So as Tori said, my name's Chase Brown. I'm in Warrensburg, which is just west of Decatur. I farm with my dad and uncle, as well as aside from the farming operation, I also have a small seed business. We only do cover crops and small seeds. Started that in 2012. Journey started there in the drought. We have cattle and started exploring cover crops and really enjoyed it, and kind of spent the last 10 years diving into cover crops and regen ag practices and learning as much as I can and being part of groups like we have here. So Tori asked me today to talk about cover crop mixes, and I was telling Tori before everyone signed on, I'm not a big technology guy. I'm not great with PowerPoints. These PowerPoints are very, elementary. They're mostly for my keep me on track. I'm more of a talker, so please don't judge me on my PowerPoint slides. But Tori said that I asked in this group that we're going to have what's our knowledge, working knowledge, and I saw that poll there earlier. And he said most everyone has, a pretty good handle on cover crops and what we're doing with them. And so I don't want to sit here and dive into specific mixes and saying you need to put this species and that species in. Frankly, in my opinion, there is no right or wrong mix. That's up to you and your goals and your customers' operations, what species you think you need to be putting in. Today, I want to talk more about the nuts and bolts of, okay, we've decided to make a mix. How are we going to figure out our seeding rates, and how are we going to figure out what we can and can't put into that mix? So if you've ever heard me talk before, I'm big on why. I always ask the question, why? I feel mixes are, no-till is better than full tillage. Cover crop is better than no-till. And as we progress in a soil health journey, mixes are the next step. So in my business, if I have a customer that has been doing cover crops for a while, and let's just say he's been doing cereal rye, I feel like mixes are the next step. And the question is always why. And we have to be careful and really make sure that our producers or we understand that why we're going to do a mix. And one of the reasons I always say that is mixes can get very expensive. As we start adding these species in, we can get some cost in them. I've been working on a mix here for some cost share stuff, and we're talking in as much as $35 to $50 just for seed. Well, when a grower's spending $50 for seed versus $15 for a cereal rye, for a bushel of rye, they want to start seeing some real response. And as we all know in soil health and in cover crops, seeing that response can sometimes be hard to see and hard to put a dollar amount on. So before we really dive into complex mixes with a grower, I want to make sure that they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. I always tell them we're blessed here in the Midwest with some unbelievable soils, and the glacier sure helped us. But the reason we have these amazing soils, high carbon soils, is the native prairies that we had here for thousands of years. And if you've ever been in a native prairie patch, there is all sorts of diversity. And that's what we're trying to mimic with these mixes. You know, you see tall plants, you see short plants, you see forbs, you see legumes, you see warm season grasses and cool season grasses. So we're trying to mimic that diversity. And, you know, I call it the steroids for soil biology. Not that no-till isn't helping soil biology, not that monoculture cover crop isn't helping biology, but boy, when we put that mix in, all of a sudden we're giving it a steroid, and we can advance the soil health practices so much more rapidly. And you know, one of the questions I get asked a lot from my customers is, I've been doing cover crops for 3-4 years. Can I start cutting out my dry fertilizer? Can I start cutting out, uh, you know, a herbicide application? And I always get real nervous when they want to start cutting things out, because we got to get that soil clicking, and we got to get everything working right and cycling nutrients. And I feel like, in my opinion, we got to have a mix to do that. And with a mix, we can start growing large amounts of biomass, and we can start really getting things moving to a place where we can start peeling back some of those synthetics and some of those applications. So that's kind of my big thing on customers, is why we need them to understand why we're going to do a mix and how they work and what we're going to achieve with the mix, so that we can move their operation forward. So in an attempt to make my slides a little prettier, here's a couple pictures of a couple mixes. The one on the left is some oats and radish and rape. The one on the right is a mix we've been using for quite a few years as part of an NRCS program. It is a pollinating cover crop. We put a large amount of buckwheat in it and fly it on in the fall, and then it flowers before frost for the pollinators. It's kind of a fun mix. It's expensive, but there's seven species in it. I'm going to bounce back to the Y mixes. The other thing I forgot to mention is, from a risk management standpoint, when we do a monoculture cover crop, we see some failures from time to time, whether it be we're in a dry spell or we're wet. You know, in a mix, we now have multiple species to help fill those voids. So if we have a seeding problem, if we have a germ problem, we have a weather pattern, application problem, all of a sudden, by putting in a mix, we can help alleviate some of that. I really like it from that risk management standpoint. It sure makes our cover crop look much more successful out there when we have multiple species. It can fill in a lot of mistakes. So the big considerations, when I have a grower sitting in front of me wanting, and we've made the decision that we're going to do a mix, the place I start, and I'm going to bounce around here a little bit, but the place I start is the application method. I need to know, is a grower going to be flying this on? Are they going to be using a drill? Are they going to broadcast it? What's their application method? Because we all know not all seed sizes are the same. And so I don't want to put a super small seed with a rather large seed, put it out there with a grain drill and bury one too deep, and we've wasted that small seed. A prime example of that, on my own home farm, we have a little bit of organic. I had a 7 or 8 species blend. It's going to be in the slideshow a little later. And I call it the Great Seed Shed Clean Out. When I go to the organic summer cocktail mix, I kind of walk around the shed and clean up half bags and partial bags. And I had some Balanza clover sitting there. Thought, well, we'll throw it in. It can't hurt anything. I don't know what Balanza will really do in July. We'll see if we can get it to flower and see what it does. If you know anything about Balanza clover, there's like 1 million seeds per pound. It is like planting water. You will find every crack, every hole in your drill, it will run through it. Super small seed size. I was also planting sun hemp, cowpeas, and sunflowers, some of the larger seeds that we put on for cover crop. Well, I blended them together, and within a couple weeks, I realized across 80 acres, I don't think I had a single Balanza plant. The reason being, I was in July, I was planting my seeds to moisture. I buried that Balanza clover so deep that it never stood a chance. It almost needed to be broadcasted on top of the ground, where those smaller or larger seeds need to be buried down to moisture. So I need to know my application method. Same thing. I'm not saying you can't fly on sun hemp and cowpeas, or you can't fly on Balanza clover, but we're at two different ends of the spectrum, and they don't necessarily fly on well. So we need to know a grower's application method before we just start throwing a bunch of seeds in, because if they're going to do, not all seeds like the same application method. So that's a big consideration. We need to know those seed sizes and keep those in mind. The other thing is species. Whenever I make a mix, I try to have a grass, a brassica, or a forb, and a legume in there. But one step farther than that, we need to understand the plant types and the root types and the structures. I don't want to plant sun hemp and sunflowers and sorghum Sudan grass. That would check all three of those boxes: a grass, a legume, and a forb. I don't want to plant all three of those because they have the same type of structure. They're very tall. They're very upright. I would rather, I like having those three in, but we need to have something a little shorter stature, a little broader leaf to make some canopy. We want to cover all different heights, sizes. So really understand the plant structures and the root structure types. Cereal rye or some of the cereal grains have a very fibrous root system. They complement very well with the brassica that has more of a tap root. It goes back to that diversity. Let's add multiple, not only multiple species, but let's add some diversity into our plant and root structure types as well. At the end of the day, we're trying to capture sunlight. We're trying to capture carbon. Let's get some diversity in our, get some diversity in our types of plant structures. It's another picture of a mix. This was annual ryegrass, turnips. I believe there was radish and rape also mixed into it. The picture doesn't show it real well, but that was flown on. Actually, back up, this was put on with a Hagee high clearance spreader into standing corn. This was about Labor Day that it was planted. So this is where we get into the nuts and bolts and the $1 million question of how much of each species do I put in? And I joke around that it's part science, it's part intuition, and it's part experience. There is no right or wrong on this. You have to get just a feel for it. I'm going to start with, and I was talking to Tori earlier, do not take my word for any of this on your cost share rates. Make sure if you have a cost share program, you talk. I think there's some NRCS folks on here that might correct me. Our NRCS office that we work with here in Macon County, they use the Midwest Cover Crop Council rates. And their method when they make a mix is they go to the Midwest Cover Crop Council website, and they take the recommended seeding rates. And then for every species you add in, you can proportionately cut those seeding rates. So if you add 2 species, it's 50% of each. You use 3, it's 33%, 4, a quarter, and so on and so forth. I feel this is a great starting place. It works very well. A word of caution on this. It goes back to that why. If I have a grower that has been using cereal rye for quite a few years, and he says, I love this cereal rye for my weed control and for my erosion control on my rolling farms. But I'm ready to do a mix, and I say, okay, we're going to use the method of cutting it proportionately. We're going to add in 2 species to that cereal rye, and all of a sudden I go from a 50 or 60 pound seeding rate on my cereal rye, and I throw in a rape and a radish at a couple pounds. All of a sudden I've cut using this method, I have cut my cereal rye down to 30, 30 pounds, we'll call it. While it's still doing some good, those brassicas are going to winter kill. And come spring, we're going to have about 30 pounds of rye out there. And he's going to be really upset because the weeds are going to come through. He might see some washing. He's not going to get the effectiveness of having that 60 pound rate. So we need to keep in mind what a grower's why is. Like I said, this is a great starting point, but we need to be a little flexible. We need to say, okay, he really likes his weed control. I can back off that rye a little bit, but we're going to keep it up there still too. We aren't going to go to the full 25% rate using this method. So that's where you got to have some intuition. You got to have some experience. The old saying when I first started 10 years ago was, we don't want any more than 2 pounds of a brassica in any mix. Well, 2 pounds of a couple, if I'm putting a prime example, this mix I'm working on, we have radish, turnip, and rape in there. We have 3 brassicas. If I only put 2 pounds of a total brassica in any mix, we are now not qualified for the program. And we're, I think, pretty low in terms of our incorporation of brassicas in the mix. So there's nothing set in stone. There's things you can work off of. I think this is a great starting point, but we need to have a little experience and a little intuition to say, I don't want to go that heavy on this, or I don't want to go that low on this species, because our experience in cover crops tells us this species does this very well, and we want to have it as the main base of our mix. So we aren't going to cut it all the way back as far as we can. I don't know if that makes sense. We'll have some time for questions later, and we can cover that a little bit more. But I think that's a good starting point. Realize that all seeds don't have the same size. 2 pounds of rape is not the same as 2 pounds of rye. So the proportionate, the percentage wise works very well, but make sure we're using those recommended rates, and then we can adjust them accordingly. How do I mix it? So I don't know why someone told me this just a few years ago, and I wish I'd been told it 10 years ago, that putting it in pro boxes, and you go from pro box to pro box, after 3 times, it is fully mixed. It is incredible how well it's mixed. I spent years mixing it in 5-gallon buckets by hand, trying to put 2 augers together into a truck. We've done it all, from concrete mixers to whatever. And someone said, oh, you just dump every ingredient into a pro box and you transfer it between boxes. After 3 times, it's pretty well blended. I did that, and it works unbelievable. Most guys have pro boxes sitting around or access to them. Most seed suppliers will mix for a fee. After I discovered this method, I don't know why you would pay anyone to do it unless you have a large amount, because frankly, it's pretty easy. I do have a lot of growers that apply their cover crops with dry fertilizer. It's easier to pay the fertilizer plant to make that trip in the fall when they're out farming. If you're doing that, they're going to mix that dry fertilizer anyway. Utilize that drum mixer that they have at the fertilizer plant. Dump it all in. It's going to mix. There's no right or wrong way. Get it incorporated. But the Pro Box method works extremely, extremely well. We mix a couple 100,000 pounds a year with pro boxes. So it works and is effective. The big question we always hear with mixes are, will they separate in the box? Will they separate in the planter? Will they separate going into the airplane and the plane moving around? I'm going to sit here and tell you that yes, they will separate. I'm also going to sit here and say that it is not a concern of mine. Very rarely have I had it separate to the point of creating a problem. I have never opened my drill box and had the top 2/3 being oats and the bottom third being my small seeds. They do sift out a little bit, but what I have found is we are typically doing 2,000, 4,000 pounds at a time. We don't have the equipment to do large acres on an airplane. They're doing 40 or 50 acres at a time. That seed just doesn't have enough time to fully separate. Now, if we're using a big air seeder and we're doing a couple 100 acres at a time and it's bouncing across the field, yes, I think we can have some separation. Talking about that Balanza clover, it's super small. What I noticed is it would separate in the drill and it would collect in the bottom of the seed cup. But what would eventually happen is enough of that clover would collect in the seed cup that then the big seeds would flip some out. We have been trained in agriculture. Everything's precision. We have a very expensive corn planter that precision plants corn like a picket fence. When it comes to cover crops, if I'm a little heavy on clover in one spot, a little heavy on rape in the other spot, is it ideal? No. Do we want that? No. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really makes that big of a difference. I've never seen a situation, and there might be some folks on here that have, by the time we're going from pro boxes into seed tenders into whatever application tool, whether it be a plane or a drill, I just personally have not seen separation. And that's the big thing I always hear. It also goes back to that seed size. I think if we keep in mind relative seed sizes, we can avoid that. If you're going to use super large seeds, I keep going back to that Balanza and cowpea mix. Sun hemp and cowpeas are very similar in size. We put in a very fine seed. The likelihood of separation is going to be much higher than if we can kind of keep a relatively similar seed types and seed sizes. But it's never really a major concern for myself. I've yet to see it in a major problem. So I'm going to kind of end on the power of a mix. And I've talked about it quite a bit today because this honestly was my first big experience in a mix that did what I felt was everything right. And the whole purpose of a mix, I finally got to see it. This was a organic mix that we put on after wheat. So being that it was a summer annual mix and we planted it in July, obviously we get a tremendous amount of growth that we don't normally get in some of the cooler season mixes. But this mix had sun hemp, cowpeas, radish, rape, oats, Balanza clover, and flax in it. If you look at that list, we kind of covered all the different styles I was talking about, from root styles to upright plants to broadleaf plants. This mix we put out as our organic fertilizer for our corn crop that is currently growing out there. The corn, considering the year, considering how dry we were in June, looks absolutely incredible. This was not the sole source of nitrogen. We did put some turkey litter down, but it is noticeable enough. We've had neighbors who don't do any cover crops comment, wow, that corn looks really good. And I put a huge value on this cover crop mix. And I'm going to show you here the analysis we pulled on it. It actually was a little low on the dry matter or the tonnage. I think we could have gotten that a little higher. I did not have sorghum stand grass that I wanted to put in it. There was a mistake and it was treated seed, so I could not use it. But this mix raised 53 pounds of nitrogen. I know the picture is hard to see, but there's the big three. There was 53 pounds of nitrogen, 25 pounds of phosphorus, and 82 pounds of potassium in that cover crop. When we have growers that want to start peeling back on some of their inputs, this is the power of a mix. We raised 50 pounds of nitrogen out there. What's that value? So I talk about growers getting a little shell shock when they hear a price. When we can show 50 pounds of nitrogen, 25 pounds of phosphorus, 82 pounds of potassium, we can pay for that seed mix very quickly. We just have to get them to understand what that mix has to do, and we have to allow it to have time to do what it's supposed to do. We have to give it the best opportunity, and when we start working with these mixes, we can start making some changes in our management. But we certainly want to crawl. I'm always one very vocal on keep it simple, keep it basic. If you're doing 1 or 2 species, let's add. If you've been doing oats and radish, let's try to add in a clover. If you've been doing cereal rye, let's try to add in a winter camelina. And when we get comfortable with that, we can continue to add species. And as we get very familiar with these mixes and comfortable with these mixes, the sky's the limit. We hear guys doing 10 and 15 species blends. When we get to that level, that's where we can really start pushing things and doing a lot better job. So I don't know how I was on time, Tori. I told you it'd be quick and pretty basic, the nuts and bolts, but that's what I got. Would be happy to answer any questions.
Nope, we're right on time, Chase. Appreciate that. So I guess I will ask a question first. We have an NRCS agronomist who's willing to come off mute and speak to some of the NRCS considerations. But before we get to that, I want to just get your take on some of the hurdles or obstacles to multi-species cover crop adoptions. You spoke a little bit about it. Add one species in, but what are some of the hurdles in getting folks to sort of accept the idea that we need to broaden beyond cereal rye before soybeans? How do we cross that bridge and get folks to start using more and more of these species in regular practice?
I think the big one, and I touched on, was cost. When we start doing some of these blends, we can get a lot of cost wrapped up in a hurry. And so we scare off a lot of folks when we start talking $30 to $50, and they're at the beginning of their cover crop journey. That price shell shocks a lot of folks, and so that's why the education is so important, to get them to understand the importance of a mix and what a mix can help them do. I think that's the biggest hurdle, and like all cover crop adoption, I think one of the biggest hurdles is just knowledge. They just don't know. They do a cost share program, whether it be government or private or whatever, and they go easy. They do an oats and radish, or they do a cereal rye, and they get comfortable with it, and they never really progress any further. So I think as retailers, as seed salespeople, as AFT or NRCS, we have to educate and continue to get them to understand the total value of cover crop, and that we're going to build, and it's a progression, and these mixes are part of that progression.
Okay, very good. I guess we'll go ahead and let Brett Roberts, if you want to go ahead and come off mute and speak to your question or comment about NRCS cost share requirements and mixes versus single species. If you want to go ahead and come off mute and speak to that, and then we'll continue conversation.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Everything that was mentioned by the speaker in terms of, how do you like say if you're going to go from a single species to a mix, and some people are encouraged by the higher payment rates, for using mixes. But let's, I think sometimes we make the mistake of looking at payment rates and boy, that looks good. And so I want to mix. So everything that was mentioned here about what do you want in a mix? What do you want it to do for you? Everything that was cautioned, if you will, by the speaker, I couldn't echo more. We need to look at what we want to create out there in the field versus just jumping at a payment rate. And frankly, that happens all too often. And some people wind up with lack of their results doesn't meet expectations, or they have particular problems that they didn't foresee, just because hey, we checked some boxes and it had these number of species and we threw it out there, and well, what happened. And so, yes, we need to be much more methodical. So we work with the Midwest Cover Council to populate our state selector tool. Okay. So it's not who's using whose rates. It's a collaborative effort between us and the Midwest Cover Crop Council, because they've developed a really decent decision tool that everybody can use to get basic information about different cover crop species and so forth. The other reason we work closely with them to kind of help match our practice standard with what's in the selector tool is that there's so many different financial assistance programs out there, not just the USDA or NRCS administered. And we want whoever's interested in cover crops to get good information, good agronomic information. And because that's the foundation of success, is getting good background information, particularly when people aren't experienced at using cover crops. So that decision tool that is developed for each state. And when I want to tell you that there is a process that Midwest Cover Crop Council uses in populating any state selector tool, is because they get a committee of people together. And this is what's key. They get a committee of people together, and that group is comprised of different types of professionals. You have extension, you've got NRCS, you've got farmers, you've got seed people, just the kind of people that you want to put together in a room to kind of pool their knowledge, within a state to determine what species are adaptable, and then customize kind of, this is more experiential than textbook, and that is seed rates, because everybody sometimes obsesses about seed rates, unfortunately. That's the process used. And so at least here in Illinois, we've tried to keep our practice standard and our approved list and seeding rates as closely matching as what you see in the cover crop selector tool as much as possible. And we've managed to do that. That way, when people are accessing different sources of information and then they come to participate in our programs, then there's not a problem with them handing in a seed mix that somehow, quote unquote, didn't meet some criteria somewhere. So let's say, what is our criteria? We don't have a rigid criteria for making mixes. So we're not engineering a bridge, okay? We're not building a bridge over a river. And we're putting annuals out. This isn't a permanent prairie mixture. This isn't a planting that we're using long-term for forage. So anything we do wrong at the onset, say of planting a pasture or hay field, we're stuck with it. The good thing is they're annuals, and if it doesn't turn out the way we want, we can change it for the next year. So what do we do to kind of determine how much of each species we need to include. And the starting point has been mentioned so far in that selector tool, or even on our practice standard, because again, the species list and seed rates identically match. Those seed rates for each species are what we call a full seed rate. Okay, that's if you're going to go out there with a monoculture. All right, that's the seed rate you should use. And
Brett,
they're a range.
Can we move on to another question? I know that we've got some piling up
Yeah.
here. I don't want to spend too much time on this
Yeah.
one. So I'm
Sure.
gonna go ahead and jump in. I hate to cut you off, but I'm gonna go
Sure.
ahead and move on to another one. Chase, I'm gonna make this kind of a two-part question here. We get a lot of questions around planting dates and termination timing. So how do you make seed selections and ratios determinations based on, if one species is calling for an earlier planting date and another species is calling for a later planting date, and then how does that correlate with termination timings, where if you have multiple species in a mix, we may be running into issues where one species is ready for termination but not all. How do you work around that?
I think that's something we need to keep in mind, and I think the Cover Crop Council tool can help you with that. A prime example would be we started putting Balanza clover in with cereal rye, and we were roller crimping it. And what we found is the cereal rye matures much faster than the Balanza. And we were getting into issues because, like you said, the maturity didn't match. So a simple fix was we went to triticale, which was more of a match. So I think that's where some of the knowledge comes into play, that we need to have an understanding. And I'm glad just like we have to have an understanding of seed sizes and types and plant types and structures, we need to have an understanding of maturities, because we might need to pull out something. Oftentimes there is a substitute, like in the cereal grain case, we went from rye to triticale, which has very similar type benefits as the rye, a little different, but very similar. So that's more on the termination side and the maturity side. As far as planning, what I've found is a lot of times these species are a little bit more forgiving than you think. You can plant some of them a little earlier than you should. Earlier is better than later, but a lot of these are forgiving in that you do have some flexibility in them. But I think it is something you need to keep in mind. And there's oftentimes a substitute, Tori, to that. And it might be as simple as pulling out one species, and there's a very similar species that has a maturity of 2 weeks later, and we can just flip flop them. But that, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is a consideration. We do need to look at, I feel, more maturities than we do planting dates, because typically planting dates, if we're doing a cool season mix, pretty much anything we're going to put in that mix does pretty well as a cool, relatively close on the same planting dates.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So this is a question that I think a lot of us will probably be fielding as many growers move through a cover crop and soil health journey, is at what point in cover cropping do you recommend ramping up that multi-species integration? It sounds like it's the sort of thing that you don't want to jump into with both feet right off the bat. But at what point do you pull that trigger and say, okay, it's time to start diversifying the mix a bit?
I think it's like getting us to take the leap to do cover crops the first time. At some point, you have to say we're ready, and you have to jump in. Keep it simple. You can do a 5-6 species blend if you keep the species within that blend simple. It's just it's no different, Tori, than I have a brand new cover cropper, and I'm not going to tell them to put out 70 pounds of cereal rye, and we're going to roller crimp. We're going to plant green. We're going to let the beans come up, and we're going to roller crimp it. That's a little advanced. That's a couple years down the road. Let's start basic. Let's do a winter kill oats and radish. And once they get comfortable with that, we can progress to rye and terminating it early in the spring. And once they get comfortable with that, we'll progress to planting green, and then we'll progress to roller. So I think it's no different. At some point you have to jump in, but let's start, let's understand our species so we don't have a mess. We don't have something getting away from us or a species going to seed and creating a bigger mess for us. But let's start building. Let's start stacking and adding. If we did 2 species this year, let's add 3 or 4. Hey, that worked. And I think seeing results help with that as well. We put in, if we're doing a winter kill and we decide let's do an overwintering and let's put in a clover, and we see that clover in the spring and say, wow, that was cool and that worked. Let's build on that. We need to have some small, let's have some small wins and successes. And then we'll just, I'm big on just keep building, keep stacking.
That makes sense. Crawl before you walk and walk before you run.
Right, right.
Yep, makes sense. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up our Q&A at this point. I know there's probably some questions that we haven't got to, and that seems to always be the case. But no, I appreciate you being with us, Chase. A lot of good information there. So we'll go ahead and get things wrapped up here. I don't know if we have any more. I know we've got a slide here for CCAs to get some CCA credits, myself included. So if you want to take a moment and use the QR code, if you don't have the app to be able to do that, you can go ahead and add your name and information to the Google form link, which we will put in the chat. Thank you, Gene. And we'll be sure to get you your CCA credits. And then we have another poll here at the end that we would like people to take a moment to answer. And Gene, I'll let you share results of that, or if we're going to share results of that, but I won't be able to see them.
Yeah, I think everybody should see the poll there and be able to answer it. It has 3 questions. And then while folks are doing that too, just a reminder that we like to use this call and invite you all to share other updates with people of events or field days that you might be hosting or learning opportunities. And so I know Tori, there's one that's AFT is part of with the Soil and Water Conservation District. Do you want to maybe mention that? And I can drop the link in the chat for that too.
Sure. So coming up on July 29th, for those of you who are kind of in northern or western Illinois, Rock Island County Soil and Water Conservation District is hosting their Family Farmapalooza free event, family friendly, good opportunity to get out and see some conservation practices, learn a little bit more about it, learn more about cover crops and soil health. And bring the kids. It should be a good event. AFT will have a presence there as well. So come on out and enjoy the day. It runs, I believe, from 2 to 6 o'clock. That's a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, and then I also just dropped a link in the chat for webinar series that ISAP is hosting, walking and sharing information on some of the climate smart commodity projects that are coming online for Midwest farmers in Illinois, and we'll be featuring the Ag Outcomes, Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and ADM's incentives this Friday, July 14 at 8 a.m. That series starts, and then also July 28th, we have 2 other programs that we'll be highlighting in the I think the registration or the information page is in the link there. And then it looks like Rachel posted a cover crop farmer panel discussion July 13th in Woodhull, Illinois. That's tomorrow from 5 to 7 p.m. Sponsored by Illinois Extension, Corn, and Illinois Soybean Association. You can contact Rachel for more information. I don't know if, oh, and free dinner. Oh, nice. Thanks, Rachel.
Can't beat that.
Yeah, if anyone else has other events they want to share or questions, I think we have maybe a few more minutes. And you're welcome to come off mute and show your face too. It's always nice when we can see people's face on these calls to share information about the events that might be coming up or you might be part of.
Chase, is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. Gene, talking about events, Tori and I were talking here before everyone got on. There is going to be Soil Health Academy coming here to Illinois, put on by Understanding Ag. Tori, what were the dates on that? I think you said August 1 through the 3rd.
August 1st to the 3rd. That's correct.
So
I'll
as
be there.
another event, that one's yeah, pretty intense 3-day event, but that is another one coming up here. Soil Health Academy, put on by Understanding Ag.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else that anybody would like to add, thank you again, Chase, for joining us. Great presentation. Appreciate it. And we will catch everybody again on the next call. I believe our next one is August. What's the date on that? I'm blanking.
August 9th.
August 9th. And that will be with somebody from University of Missouri, Center for Regenerative Agriculture, I believe, correct?
Correct.
Excellent. So we hope everybody will join us again next month, and we will see you then.
Thank you.